Hi, well, welcome back to the Weekly Why. This week we have Parsha Shemini. There's a couple key ideas I'd like to address this week. It's a very interesting idea, and actually take a step back to Bereshit, back to Genesis. The Talmud says that at the time of Abraham, there were no outward appearances of age. And in fact, that you wouldn't be able to tell that Abraham was older than his son Isaac, Yitzhak. And what happens is that this never existed until Abraham prayed to God to have an outward display of this. And then it says in Genesis 24, and then Abraham was well on in years. Now, the reasoning said by the Talmud is that because Abraham felt that everyone, when they had questions, they were going to his son Isaac. They thought Isaac was the most senior one for whatever reason, and so or I guess it's more appropriate to say they didn't recognize Abraham was the more senior one, and so they didn't go to him for the answers. And so there's a question there about, okay, well, that's a little odd that Abraham was so touchy about, not being asked these questions. I mean, was he really so sensitive about being slighted in this kind of a manner? Um, so have that in mind. Let's take a step back into this week's Parsha, talking about Nadav and Avihu, the sons of Aaron. Now, these sons were punished because they brought a strange fire to the temple. And what it says here is that they brought before Hashem an alien fire that he had not commanded. Now, the Talmud says that they died after ruling on a religious matter in the presence of Moses. So what that means is that really what they were doing is that they were in the presence of someone who was older than them and therefore wiser, Moses, and that they were ruling on a halakhic or an issue of Jewish law that was present, even though there was someone who was much more learned than them who was right there. And the Talmud gives another story about one of the rabbis of the Talmud, Rabbi Eliezer, and what happened of the Mishnaic period. And what happened is this rabbi, one of his students was paskening. He was given, basically he was deciding on a religious matter in the presence of Rabbi Eliezer. And Rabbi Eliezer said to his wife that he would be surprised if this rabbi, if the student, ended up living a long time. And sure enough, the student died young. And so his wife said to him, "How do you know? Did you curse him? How do you know he would die so young?" And he said, "Simple, because I was there, and he decided on a halakhic, on a Jewish matter in my presence." Now, again, this seems a little odd. Was Abraham so sensitive? Was Rabbi Eliezer so sensitive? Was Moses so sensitive as to let people die? I mean, Abraham didn't let people die, but he went out of his way and asked God, so, listen, people should know that I'm the more senior one. But in terms of both Moses and Rabbi Eliezer, I mean, were they really that sensitive that other people making a halakhic decision in front of them would make them basically kill somebody else or have God kill somebody else? And I think that the issue is that it's much, much more severe than that. When a student makes a ruling in the presence of a teacher, what he's saying really is that he's denying that there's any kind of a Masorah, that there's a Jewish tradition. What he's saying is that really my logic, my understanding at this point, even though I'm young and immature, when I say immature, I mean young and, inexperienced, that's good enough. That we don't need a Jewish tradition, that we don't need anything, that we don't need anything taught down and passed down, that in order for me to make a decision on this matter, just my own brain is enough. And so that's the big problem that we can make with people like Nadav and Avihu. That's the problem that they made. The problem that they made is to say, listen, we understand that, the point of sacrifice is that God doesn't need a sacrifice, but the whole point of a sacrifice is that it helps us bring closer to God. And so how could God not want us to bring a sacrifice to him? But the whole idea is that God works within specific parameters. It's not that God works within specific parameters, but he, in his relationship to us, works within that way. And so the whole idea is that if God says, here are the following laws in which you can come close to me, it doesn't really make any logical sense for us to say, screw that, I'm going to tape it my own way to figure out how to get close to God. That makes no sense at all. He's the one asking us, listen, if you want to be close to me, do A, B, and C. It makes no sense for us to say, I'm not going to do that, I'll do D, E, and F. That's the way I'm going to get close to God. Because the very person we're trying to get close to tells us to do A, B, and C. It makes no sense whatsoever to ignore that and do something else for the sake of getting close to that God. So that's the whole idea, that the mistake that Nadav and Avihu made. Really, one was, in a direct way, that they said, we are going to decide on our own, using our own brains, what's the best way to connect to God. And from a more kind of a macro perspective, the whole problem is that really what that means is they're denying any kind of a tradition. What it says is basically that I don't need anyone else to tell me what to do, is that I can decide how I'm going to connect to God, where and how. And that's obviously a huge issue, not just of arrogance, but of really a denial of a lot of the fundamental tenets of Judaism as well. And so that's it for Parshat Shemini this week. Best wishes, Shabbat Shalom, God bless.